Hello and welcome to another fun episode of Agency Automators. Today I'm joined with host Jordan Chu. Hey dude, what's up? How you
Hey
doing?
Noah, how you doing?
I'm doing super awesome. And we're also joined today by Richard Fergie from Forecast Forge. And how you doing, Richard?
Yeah, doing very well, thank you.
Awesome. I'm super stoked about this episode because we're get to combine two things. One thing that I know not enough about, and one thing that I have a ton of experience about. And these two things together should be a really interesting episode. Those two things are forecasting. I feel like I've got a ton to learn around that. And then there's the whole process of building Google Sheets add-ons, which I have a fair amount of experience with. So I'm super stoked to dive in to hear about all of his weird gotchas and building his add-on because I know that I faced several that were super thorny. So, Richard, for folks who don't know a ton about you, can you give us a bunch of insight into your bio, background, and also your company?
Sure, so let me start at the beginning. I did a maths degree at university, college for you Americans.
Yep.
I didn't really think that I would ever work in marketing at all. It wasn't on my radar as a possible option. But when I finished university, I was looking for kind of any job that would give me a bit of flexibility with my hours.
Yep.
I had some sports stuff that I wanted to get done. Was pretty serious with that kind of thing at that time. And then it was a search engine optimization agency that were advertising, and they were like, "Yeah, sure, come work for us." And I thought I knew all about search engine optimization because I'd done about the PageRank algorithm
Mm,
as part of my course. But yeah, there's a lot more to it than that.
yeah.
So that was back in 2008, 2009. Turned out that I didn't really like doing SEO very much, but I did really like doing paid search.
Mm,
So as I got more and more into that, the measurement side of things became more and more important. Yeah, I think with paid search, you get to the stage where you're kind of like, okay, so I need to make this number bigger, and you can do that, but you need to make sure that that's the right number,
yep.
and that's when making sure that you're tracking the right things or making sure that you're measuring the incremental value of your efforts becomes much more important, which led me into doing much more web analytics type work. And then once you're doing that, it's like you can do some fairly heavy analysis there that leads more and more into the data sciencey side of things, which is it's a pretty good fit for me with my background, um, and in terms of what I studied at university. I didn't do very much probability when I was at university. I hated it. That's like my big regret in um, in that area. But there's a lot of stuff that isn't pure probability, um,
Mm,
that I have a good handle on and that I can grasp
mm,
quite quickly. Um, yeah, so that sort of that development took me up until around about 2011, no, 2013,
yep.
when I was working in London, and I was really quite fed up with that. It's not a good. It's a great place for some people, but it's not a great place for me.
Mm,
I wasn't making the most of the city in many ways, and if you're not doing that, it's just a very expensive place to live.
right.
So I moved to South America for a time, climbed some mountains, just bummed around, not doing very much, having a chill time.
Well,
And then while I was there, I started to pick up little bits of freelance work. And when I came back, I had no job and no money, so I was living with my parents. And sort of my main goal at that time was to not be living with my parents anymore. So then I quite quickly started to pick up enough freelance and consulting work to enable that to happen. And I start to think like, yeah, I can make a business out of this, which is what I've been doing
Hmm.
ever since. And that's in the probably the intersection of data science and marketing, I guess, is how I would describe that.
Oh,
And then that was there. That was going okay. Had some interesting projects. I had some good clients. And then back in March, the pandemic hit, and a lot of the work that I'd booked, people were just like, "Oh no, not right now. This is, we might be having to fire people. This is a really bad time for us to
yeah.
be paying external consultants." Which I completely understand where they're coming from that perspective, even though it was quite a stressful time for me. But that gave me the chance to sort of step back a bit and start Forecast Forge, because I thought there were probably going to be a lot of people having to redo all their forecasts
Yeah.
quite frequently at that
Yeah.
time, and it took me a few months to get everything going. I'd done a lot of forecasting work before on the data science side, but I hadn't done anything in AppScript or anything to integrate with Google Sheets or anything like that. So I had to learn all that and think about how that would work, which has worked really well as a sort of. I guess we'll get into this a bit more later, but I'm really pleased with the spreadsheet add-on aspect of this.
Yeah.
I get, yeah, I think you guys are probably well aware of the advantages of that kind of thing with having done all this already. But as an alternative to something that exists on a web page and is a kind of SaaS product that way, there's some major strengths to doing things this way, I think, in terms of the usability and power of what you're making. So that takes us up to now, I guess. And here
Wow.
we are. I'm on this
That
podcast.
was a fantastic. That was a fantastic introduction. So, is the mate better when you're local in South America?
Yes, I think so. It's well, I mean, where I am in the UK, you basically can't get it. So
Yeah.
it's like you can have none, being not local, or you can have some. So
Right. Right.
yes.
Huh. And you mentioned your schooling. Like I was a history major. Jordan, I've never asked you, what'd you study?
Economics.
Not that's not surprising. Uh,
I'm a math nerd as well. I'm
yeah,
sorry, Noah.
yeah, yeah. So, Richard,
we'll
what did
just
you
we'll just
study?
cut him out, and
Yeah.
you and me go.
Oh yeah, no. Richard, what did you what was your actual degree in?
Maths was
Maths.
my.
Okay. Cool.
We don't really have a major minor sort of thing
Yeah.
in the UK. That's a big difference actually. I had a friend went to do a master's in the US after he was on the same course as me, and it was a real shock to him to do his masters over there, because the UK system, it makes you specialize very early.
Yeah.
So I had to. I bet you basically have to choose between STEM or arts at about the age of 16.
Wow.
So by the time I'd finished my 4-year degree, I'd done 6 years of studying mostly maths.
Wow.
Whereas in the US, I think you probably don't pick your major until you're already at college at that point, aren't you?
Yeah.
So the sort of volume of maths that you do, even if you're a maths major, is lower.
Cool. Wow. So tell us tell us about forecasting. Explain the theory. Maybe explain a couple of the key APIs that are available, and then we'll see where that takes us.
Well, I like to. I mean, it's a huge area with lots of theories, or lots of bits to it. So I like to think of sort of, if we build it up from the simplest concept. So if you think about what's the simplest forecast that you could make, and that would be, you could say that it's just going to stay the same compared to the last value, or it's just going to stay the same as the long-term average. You could do that, and you could make a forecast using those techniques, or using those algorithms if you want to sound fancier. And so you ask yourself, like, why is that bad? Like, where does that not work? And there's two main answers to that. Is firstly, you have seasonal effects, which are things like you get more visits to your website on a Monday than you do on a Sunday, and that's a pattern that happens every week. Or it might be you get more sales after payday at the end of the month. Or at the moment it's all around Christmas, like an annual seasonality. So your sort of crude starter methods don't pick any of that up. And secondly, there's the idea of that there might be some sort of trend, by which I mean, a long-term growth where, over the course of the year, you might expect it to be 10% higher than the year before. So a lot of what else there is in forecasting is to do with estimating those two things. So to try and figure out the trend, which is the most important thing if you're trying to make a long-term forecast.
Yep.
Or if you're in a business that doesn't have very much seasonality. And then the seasonal effects, which is very important if you have a business that's driven by, the time of the year mainly. I don't really know anyone where it's like, oh, it's really important that we get Monday right because that's our biggest day. But there's plenty of people who are like, oh, we need to get Valentine's Day right because that's our biggest day. Or, if we don't hit our numbers at Easter, then we've got no chance. That kind of thing. And then there's a lot of different ways of estimating all those things, and a lot of ways of combining those estimates as well. So if we talk about the first one, there's you can say that they are additive or multiplicative.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas additive might mean that you have 300 more visits on a Monday than you do on a Sunday, and that pattern will stay the same as you over time. A multiplicative one might be you have 20% more visits on a Monday than you do on a Sunday. So as the average number of visits across the week increases, the difference between your Monday visits and your Sunday visits increases too. And you can have the same. You can have the same with seasonal trends. The longer term seasonalities.
Huh. So to bring that to SEO or PPC, how do you leverage those day to day? And can you walk us through some examples? Maybe if screen sharing helps, and if you want to show like how your add-on would help with that, do you think that would be helpful for our audience?
Yeah, but to be a bit more of a complete example, like something
Yeah.
more concrete to see. Let me share my screen.
Because I think while you're pulling your screen up, I think that's like at 2 Octobers, we have these things called goal groups, where once a quarter we get together as a group of people to solve specific problems.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest problems or challenges that we have in a sales conversation is being able to forecast out success. And I think I'm projecting a little bit from inside my own, like it's the biggest challenge for me, whereas other members on the team have a large amount of comfort with it. It's just a challenge that agencies struggle with.
Yeah, and I think that's so what I've discussed so far, the trends and seasonal aspects of forecasting.
Yeah.
In some ways, they are the easy bits, or they are well suited to being solved by algorithms.
Yep.
But I think what you're talking about is also trying to forecast the impact of things that you do.
Right.
A lot of what I've talked about so far with trend and seasonality, that's kind of a, if nothing changes, this is what we expect to happen.
Yep.
Type forecast. Whereas what you're talking about is, if we do this, what will happen?
Yep.
As a result. Now, in some ways, or for some of those questions, if you're saying, well, what if we do something that we've never done before, or what if we? A good example is with paid search budgets. If you're like, what if we spent 10 times what we'd spent before? So, a huge increase in budgets that's way out of the range of anything you have in your historical data. Then the machine learning can't really help you with that kind of question, because it relies on being able to see or be able to learn from what's happened in the past. So if you're asking questions about things that haven't happened in the past, it can't extrapolate.
Right.
It can't extrapolate from that. I mean, a lot of these algorithms, they will give you an answer if you ask them in the right way, but it won't be a meaningful answer because it's not based on anything that's in the training data.
Right.
Where it can help is if it's something that has happened before, or something that's frequently occurred in the past. Then so it's more like, what if we did this again, or or if you can point to something that's similar enough from the past,
right,
to help, then the algorithms are a lot more amenable, although they can give you a lot more useful answers.
right.
One of the things that that I'm trying to enable through Forecast Forge is for people to be able to do that in a spreadsheet. So I'll work through an example and we can talk a little bit about it as we go.
Well,
so I've got. Oh, sorry.
Can I do one quick aside here? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I just have to say how fascinating our two responses to the pandemic were. Like, your response was, we're in a major bit of upheaval, and I need to have a way to help businesses forecast their future so that they can spend marketing budget with me. And my response to it was, oh my God, this is going to destroy all of our data moving forward. How the hell are we going to know how to forecast anything? We better start pipelining everything so that we can bridge the gap, especially with Search Console data, so that when we get to 2021, we'll have both pandemic data from 2020, but we'll also have meaningful data from 2019 to be able to forecast from, knowing that I didn't know how to forecast at that time, but I knew that I needed the data to be able to do it once I could solve
that's
the problem.
A big problem for Search Console data, I think, isn't it? Do you get 18 months of it, or is it 14? 16 months.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's very hard to calculate your annual seasonality off only that much data. If you're up in May, the algorithm can't tell if that's just a random fluctuation or if it's part of a seasonal pattern, because it doesn't have enough. You guys will be backing that data up somewhere, so you can look much longer term. But the kind of default, I'll download it out of Search Console today, and then I'll get my I'll run my forecasting algorithm over it. It's not going to work so well.
Yep.
Right. So to the spreadsheet, should I zoom in on this, or do you a little bit, or do you think
good.
Your
visibility
it's large enough?
There's some interesting more patterns on your screen. Are you hiding stuff over on the right underneath your share button?
Underneath my share button. I'm not sure what's going on there. I can see this is where my Zoom panel is. So.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
All right. It's not letting me move that. So I think it's. Just
Are you on Linux or what are you on?
Yeah.
You've got a really cool UI. That's why I was asking.
This could be a problem with demonstrating the sidebar, and it'll be hidden by this.
Okay. No big deal.
Box in the corner, but we'll see how we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So first up, with any forecast, I think it's really important to plot the data. There's you have, stretch this out a bit. So the sort of patterns that the algorithm that powers Forecast Forge can work with are things like weekly seasonality and annual seasonality, and then the trend that we talked about earlier. And all of those things should be visible to the human eye. You might not be able to quantify them in as accurate a way as the algorithm can, but you should be able to observe that they are present. Obviously, if you get into neural nets or something, then you would hope that perhaps they'll pick up patterns that people won't be able to spot. But that's not what we're talking about here. It's a bit of a simpler algorithm in that it has a much stricter or predefined idea of what might be going on, and that means you can fit it with less data, and it means that the predictions are a bit more stable. If I added in an extra 2 weeks of data to this, the prediction probably wouldn't change very much. Whereas with an algorithm that is in some sense freer, like some of the large neural net ones, that wouldn't be a guarantee. And changing 1 day of data in the past might give you extremely different results in the future.
So speaking of data here, and I know you kind of mentioned it with GSC data only going back 16 months, and I see that you have, what is this, 4 years worth. So how much historical data do you typically recommend having?
If annual seasonality is important to you, and we can see for these guys it is, because they have a lull around Christmas, and it looks like maybe they have peaks in the summer, then I think you need at least 2 years worth of data, and it needs to be good, consistent quality data as well. If you've changed your tracking implementation in the middle of that, then the algorithm will learn. The algorithm won't know that the tracking implementation has been changed unless you tell it. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that later. So it might learn something that is actually nothing to do with what's going on in real life and is purely to do with tracking. You see that a lot with goal completions. If you're trying to forecast that kind of thing, someone starts off with 1 goal, and then they add 2 goals, and then they add 3 goals until they've filled up all their goals, and it looks like the number of goals is going up and up and up, or the number of completions is going up and up and up, and the forecasting algorithm is like, oh yes, this is going up, but actually it's not really going up. It's just they're tracking more things as goals. So that's the kind of thing to consider. So I'm eyeballing this data. We can see that we have a sort of trough around Christmas time. That's very common for a lot of businesses. There might be evidence of a peak in the summer, although we see a little peak there, we see a peak here. It's not incredibly strong evidence, but that's the sort of thing that we wouldn't be surprised to see the algorithm tell us about. And then we have UK lockdown here.
So are you leveraging Profit? Like, what API are you using to do?
Yeah, so it's Profit on the back end of this. Yeah. I have some of the settings tweaked, but it's the Profit model underneath. I can talk quite a lot about that if you like.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I like Profit is because there's layers in Python or R on top, but then the bit at the bottom, the bit that does the inference, is written in a programming language called Stan, which I know through other projects. So I have some custom Profit implementations which I'm working on, which are pretty cool. And that's around what I'm trying to do is get to the stage where you can use the output of one forecast as the input to another forecast.
Wow.
So how would that work? If you don't mind me going on a tangent here.
No, well, exactly. So Profit has what they call regressor columns, and that in Forecast Forge I call them helpers. Sometimes I call them regressors if I'm muddled up, and that's extra data that you provide the forecast to help it make its predictions. So here we're going to use lockdown, or a binary variable, to say whether we're in or not in lockdown as one of these columns. Other good ones you can use are things like budgets, whether or not you're running TV ads at the time. For businesses where emails are important, then adding in the dates that emails are sent really helps a lot. or things like when you're in sale or the amount of discounting on the site. Like there's a lot of things that could be useful on this depending on what the business is and what's important to it. So one of the things that I think is great about Forecast Forge is that because it's in a spreadsheet, people can customize their own regressor columns. If in a web tool, it's much more difficult to offer that flexibility. And if you do, you end up with something that looks a bit like a spreadsheet anyway. Yes, so you have these regressor columns which Profit can use as an input, and it learns the relationship between the regressor and the actual value. But a limitation of these is that you need to know what the regressor column is in the future. So if I'm forecasting for the year ahead, I need to be able to say what the value of this column is. Which for things like lockdowns, it's sort of accepted that no one knows what's going on with that in the UK anyway. So it's people can play around with, okay, well, what if we were locked down in January, or what if we were locked down in February? What do those numbers look like? I'll give you a little demo of that later on.
What does the B column represent? Is that
so B is sessions?
Oh, sessions. Got it. Okay.
So in this example, I've pulled the sessions through to the 15th of November, and then after that, we don't know. So that column's blank because we don't know. In the UK, we're in lockdown until the 2nd of December.
Got it.
So that's why these values are 1 here, and then we're 0 outside the lockdown.
So it's just on and off.
Yeah, so there's you could do something much more complicated.
Yeah.
Particularly with so at the moment in the UK we have a tiered system where some areas are in quite a strict lockdown and some areas have a bit more freedom.
Yeah.
So you could sort of, instead of 0 and 1, you could represent that as like 0.8 and 0.5 and 0.3 or something like that. But this works pretty well, and it's also really simple.
Got it.
Where was I? Yes, so you have to know the value of these in the future. For things like lockdown, it's sort of accepted that you don't, so you can play around with it. With things like, if you're making a PPC forecast, you know roughly what your budgets are going to be for the coming year, so you can fill them in, and you can play around a bit with like what if it changes, but you certainly have an idea of what that might be. But for things like so what I would like to be able to do is for say a PPC forecast, at the top you have the number of searches being done on a particular topic or keywords. Then you have the number of impressions that you get. Then you have the number of clicks that you get from those impressions. And then you have the number of conversions that you get at the end. So there's a sort of chain of things. Yeah. And so it would be really good if I was making a conversions forecast to be able to say, like, oh, well, here's a column for the number of impressions that I'm getting and the number of clicks that I'm getting. But those things, you don't know what they're going to be in the future. But you can make a forecast of them. And what I want to do is be able to feed that forecast in as a regression column for another forecast.
So
I love it.
Jordan, are we fighting for questions today? This is the first time we're like, wait.
Raise your hands and I'll pick one of you.
Okay, so I got a good one. So what I've noticed, I deal with tons and tons of bike shops, and in the United States, they were one of the few businesses that were deemed necessary throughout the lockdown.
Oh yeah, that's been insane over here as well.
Yeah, so like we saw sales absolutely explode, both in store and also online. And one thing that we saw were way more impressions, way more clicks. The conversion rates were not quite double, but pretty dang close to doubling. So how do you factor all that stuff in? Like how do you model for increased conversion rates due to that's the only way to buy, for example, for a specific product? Did we lose
thinking.
No, I'm just fascinated. I'm like, how do I, because I don't know how to solve for that. Like, everyone's wanting to know what 2021 is going to be like, and I don't know. I mean, there's so many factors. It's like how much of the vaccine is or vaccines are going to get out to what percentage of the population, how effective will they be, how many people will take the vaccine, how big is government stimulus going to be, is it going to be like 2020 again, is it going to be like 2019, is it going to be in the middle, how do you think through
Yeah.
all
So if we think about
Sorry.
if we start like with the simplest thing that might work. So
Yeah.
you're trying to forecast conversions.
Right, right.
So you have your conversions in this column,
Yep,
and then you have a regressor column for if you're in or not in
yep,
a lockdown.
yep.
Or maybe like so in the UK we see big changes around whether that happens. That might be different in the US.
Yep.
So but you could do something around like infection rate is high or low in this state, or whatever you think is driving the behavioral change.
Right.
And then the algorithm will try and learn the effect of this on conversions, and that in this case that effect that in fact includes the increased impressions and the increased clicks and the increased conversion rate altogether.
Got it.
How well it will do that, I'm not sure. There's some things where some effects are very hard to learn, but I think that'll be if your impressions and your clicks and your conversion rate are all going up at the same time and they all come down at the same time, then it will learn that effect quite well, I should think. Where it would get more tricky is if those things changed at different times. So, for example, you started off with a big increase in impressions, and then a few weeks later you got an increase in clicks, but your conversion rate stayed the same. And then a few weeks after that, there's more urgency around buying bikes or something like that because they're all running out, and then your conversion rate goes up. And that's much harder to do, and that's why I'm wanting to be able to feed these forecasts into one another. So you'd start off with a forecast for the number of impressions you were going to get, and then feed that into a forecast for clicks, and then feed the clicks results into a forecast for conversions, where what you're putting in these helper columns here for the thing that drives the behavioral change, the effect of that is an effect on conversion rate, or an effect on click-through rate, or an effect on search volume. That sounds quite difficult, but I think it is quite a difficult problem.
Yeah.
I don't think there's an easy solution to that, because it depends on you being able to figure out like what is the thing that's driving the behavioral change. In this case, it's easy because I'm saying the behavioral change is whether we are in lockdown or not. But and that has like a definitive start and end date. So it's nice for these examples. Or it might be we increase our budgets at this point or something like that. But with a lot of things, you're like, well, this thing is happening, but I'm not really sure when it started, and I'm not really sure that when it's ended, and I'm not really sure if it even has an effect on the thing we're interested in at the end. And that's where the flexibility of the spreadsheet comes in, is that you can play around with those numbers and see what the end result of your forecast is. See the accuracy of it if you applied that methodology on against historical data. By which I mean, if you're making a forecast for a month, you might hold out last month's data, make the forecast on everything through to the end of October, see what it predicts for November, and then compare that against your actuals.
So how would we take this data and run the tool?
Okay, so I will try. There's two methods. So firstly, I have custom functions.
Yep.
If I can spell. They're really good. They're really good if you're pulling in data automatically, like if you're using one of those GA add-ons that pulls in data from Google, because then when the data changes, the forecast will automatically update. Or it's really good if you were going to then manually edit the scenario. But I will start off with the sidebar because it's easier to see what I'm doing. So for a screen share, I think that's going to work better. So I'm loading that up from the add-ons menu. Please work. Please work. Please work.
Can you make your Chrome not take up your whole screen and move it like 200 pixels or around 250 pixels to the left
Yep.
so that we can all see? Yeah,
there we go.
boom, that's perfect.
Can you see that more clearly?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's great.
Great. Yeah, so you open up the add-on, this sidebar opens. Let's start off with a simple version. The first thing is you need to say your date range, which runs from the start of your data through until the end of when you want to forecast. Then we'll add in the metric, which runs through as far as you like, and then we just say where do we want the forecast to be at the end. Click Make Forecast, and then the data you've given it is sent off to the server where the computation happens, and the results are returned into the spreadsheet. There we go. If you have enough historical data compared to the duration of the forecast period, it will automatically run some back tests on the forecast methodology to see how accurate things were. So we can see with this default forecast at the daily level, our average error was nearly 30%, but over the course of a whole year, our average error was 17%, and that's quite normal to see because some of these daily errors are positive and some of them are negative. So as you aggregate them up into weekly errors and then into monthly errors and then into annual errors, the positives and negatives cancel each other out and you get a better result overall. If we want to add in the lockdown, we can so we'll just add a column in here as a regressor, but it'll take a range, so you can add in as many of these as you like. I'll say that I had someone try and add in 12,000 of them, and that will cause the server to run out of memory.
They tried to add 12,000 regressor columns or rows?
Yeah, columns.
Wow. That all had
data.
I didn't even know you could fit that many in Google Sheets.
Yeah.
Maybe I've got the number wrong, but they were really maxing it out. It's definitely definitely a lot of columns, and I can also add a country code in here. So this automatically will add UK holiday information for the forecast. So if it was US, I would add US, and then that would have things like Thanksgiving and 4th of July and stuff in, which we don't have in the UK.
Are you saying that you guys don't have a sense of gratitude in the UK?
No, certainly not. Everyone with gratitude left and went to the US, I think.
That's funny. Can you explain what D, E, and F are? What? Because there's
yes. So column D is the expected value of the forecast,
mm-hmm.
and then column E is a lower bound on the estimate, and column F is an upper bound. You can change the predictive interval width here. So this 0.8 says that 80% of the time we'd expect it to be between these two bounds. That's so basically that would mean every week you'd expect to see one or two outside of this range, and that's quite an important thing with forecasting, that it's what's called well calibrated, that the predictive interval width matches up with what if you've got a predictive interval width of 0.8 but actually 100% of your observations lie within it, then interval width is actually too wide. That's very important if you're doing things like, have you seen the causal impact package in R for measuring the effect of interventions?
Not yet. I've played with more, like, I've probably spent 6 hours with it in the past 2 years. So
Yeah,
not
so that do I have an easy to find example of that? Let me I've written a blog post about it, so let me find that. Or did I do a video?
yeah.
I think it was a video. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so causal impact. Where's the example here? How well calibrated the interval width is very important. The idea behind it is that you take the data from before you made the intervention, which might be a site change or it might be a change in customer messaging or anything like that. You use that data to make a forecast for what would have happened during the experiment period, and then you compare the actuals with the forecast. And if the actuals lie outside this predictive interval, you can use that to judge how likely it is that a genuine change happened. So if you get this predictive interval wrong, and particularly with causal impact, I think the default predictive interval is too wide in a lot of cases, then you end up getting a lot of false negatives in this experiment, or this kind of experiment. So anyway, so you can customize the width of the predictive interval. So a 0.8 width would mean that roughly 1 in 5 of your daily observations will fall outside that width. If you increase that to 0.9, it would be 1 in 10, and so on.
Now I get
it. Yeah, so we can see a chart of this forecast here. So this is first lockdown. This is second lockdown bleeding into the Christmas period, where we always see a drop, and then after that things recover quite well. We can do a quick experiment on what would happen if we were locked down again. So I just need to change. These values. Let's make it nice and easy to see on the chart. Let's give ourselves a good long lockdown in the middle there.
So Richard, it sounds like this is really good for coming up with a control group for experimentation, and then charting experiment values against a control.
Yes, so that's certainly the causal impact stuff. That's exactly what it's good for. You use the forecast as kind of a synthetic control that you can compare against what you actually observed. So if we flick back to the chart here, we can see, so that's what it expects to happen if there's a lockdown when we change the whatever these dates are. What is that? April into May.
And how have you been able to drive ROI for your clients using the tool?
So I feel like there's two main ways that they can use this. Firstly is if they can make a better forecast, then they know better what to expect. Which sounds really obvious, but that's very important for businesses in terms of like managing stock levels or setting targets. If you're working with a bunch of agencies across a whole, you might have an email agency, a paid search agency, or an SEO agency, or maybe they're all just grouped into one. But being able to set better targets for people like that really helps you get the most out of them. If the target's too low, then people end up coasting, and if the target's too high, it's very demoralizing to constantly be behind target. So if you have a better forecast of what you expect to happen if nothing changes, then that helps you set better targets. The other way is through being able to play around with these extra helper columns and figure out which are the ones that actually help you improve your forecast. Because knowing that, I mean, the forecast is kind of a model of how you think the world works. And so if you know these are the things that are important for helping us predict our sessions or our revenue or whatever, then those are also the things that are important that you get right or do more of in order to drive, higher revenue or better ROI or whatever the business targets might be. The forecasting model that you have is your model of how the world works and how the metric you're interested in responds to changes.
So can you plug in increased average time on page, increased conversion rate, increased pages per session? I mean, can you just, because sorry, I'm going to take a step back for a second. So I've been operating on a really simple revenue model, which Jordan is sick of, I'm sure, but revenue equals traffic times average order value times conversion rate. And we try and make all three of those things larger for every client, every month, every engagement. And we find that that works. So backing into that, the way that I got to that place was just taking revenue, throwing it into a Data Studio time series report, and then plugging in every single metric on GA and watching how they trend and correlate with them. So it doesn't mean that I understand the leading indicators, but I understand what correlates to revenue, right? And so how would I plug in to find the meaningful inputs? Like, how do you think through that to figure out what the leading indicators are that are going to drive ROI in a meaningful way? I don't know if
I don't have a machine learning methodology for finding out
Whoa.
what other, you said he was going to do that.
Yeah.
I don't have a machine learning methodology for finding out what those things are. I think that's a very complicated problem because the space of possible options is huge.
Yep.
But if you have a hypothesis for what those things are,
yeah,
or what the actions you take that drive those things are, then this is a way you can test whether that's good or not. For example, you've got the accuracy metrics down here, and you can see if adding in the things you're doing as columns improve the accuracy of the forecast, which would mean that a model of the world that contains those things is better than a model of the world that ignores those things. So here we've added in the lockdown and we've added in the UK holidays, and you can see that our percentage errors has improved across the board. So we know that we can say that those things are important for this business. There's a correlation there, and this is how much it affects the output.
Does Forecast Forge show you the weight of each regressive variable?
Not yet. I have, so for example, let's just write this in the middle. So you can write out what I call metadata about the forecast into the sheet, and there's definitely the possibility to include those weights as part of this, but that's not a feature that's been implemented yet. I need to find people like yourself who are interested in that, and then talk to them about things like interpretability. Are you just interested in what has the biggest weight, or is it more important that the weight be sort of meaningful on the scale of the variable you're talking about? Because that's quite important. And then there's also issues around, like, if someone puts in 1,000 of these, how is that displayed? Yeah, so the metadata is just like a record of what forecast inputs you used, and then the accuracy. So you can use that to keep track of how all those things are changing as you try and improve your forecast or over time as as you get more data in.
Yeah, the context to my question is I kind of was inspired from Noah's comment about his revenue formula that he uses. So if he's able to say, hey, this variable has the greatest impact, so this month let's focus on improving conversion rate rather than traffic, as an example.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in that specific example, I feel that the main issue is around which is easier to improve. You could be like, oh, well, if we improve conversion rate by 10%, that gets us way more than improving, one of these other things by 10%. But it turns out that because conversion rate is multiplicative, right, whereas everything else is additive.
Mm-hmm.
Also, sorry, the AOV is multiplicative as well, but the number of sessions is additive. So yes, that question, it all depends on where you're at now. If you've never done any conversion rate optimization before, that is probably a low-hanging fruit. But if you've spent like the last 10 years tweaking every last detail of the site, then being like, oh, we think if we can improve the conversion rate, we'll do a lot better. It's like, well, yes, that's true, but it's not going to be very easy to improve the conversion rate.
Totally.
I don't really know how to give that kind of context to a machine learning algorithm. It's very, I think, like how optimized the conversion rate is on this site is kind of quite hard to quantify.
Cool. No, I feel like I interrupted you there. Were you going to say something?
No, it's really cool. I'm looking at how the tool works, and I'm envisioning what the AppScript backend looks like. And what I like about this is how there's a bunch of like get range, right? You're just doing like lots of get range things, and you're triggering those with your use current selection. And then you're creating a variable and pushing that variable probably in a post up to your API. And your API lives inside Cloud Run?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And then it processes the data with who knows how many gobs of RAM you need. And then it returns the data and visualizes it inside your sheet. Huh. So
yeah, no, that's exactly how it works.
Yeah. So how did you think through? Do you feel like we need to go? We don't have a ton more time, so I'm interested in learning about how you thought through the productization of this technology. Do you feel like we did enough on the forecasting side, Jordan, or do you have more questions? Because I don't want to turn the page unless we're ready.
No, I'm good on my side. Let's dive into the architectural stuff.
Let's. So, how did you think through turning it into a product? How did you think through the revenue?
As I say, I started thinking about this back in April.
Yeah.
And my first stab at anything in this area was around. It was a free web-based thing where people could link in their Google Analytics data, and it would tell them sort of how much the pandemic had affected their site and whether or not things were returning to normal for that business. I think, at the time there was definitely everything had changed for just about anyone. I don't think I saw any site data where it was kind of like, oh, well, yeah, the pandemic has made no difference. It was all people were like it had either dropped down off a cliff or they were booming and struggling to keep up with demand. So one or the other. So everyone was having questions around like, yeah, okay, this has happened, but is it starting to move back towards normal? And that was a good exercise in getting me more productive with Cloud Run that I'd used before, but I didn't have a great deal of experience of, and diving a bit deeper into forecasting and experimenting with different models. I mean, I've settled on Profit for this one, but there's many others you can use. But then, as I started to think about, where are the forecasts that I'm making not working? Where are they falling down? It was all to do with the forecasting algorithm not knowing things that I knew, which is where the idea of people need to be able to add in these other columns to say whether or not, oh, the site was in sale during this period, and that's why it was unusually high, and it's going to be in sale again in 2 weeks. Or, and if you're a phone company, this huge spike is because Apple have launched a new iPhone, and that happened here, and here as well, and it's going to happen again on this date. Like that it was those kind of things that I thought that's the reason why these forecasts aren't very good, or that's what's happening when these forecasts aren't very good. So I start to think, well, how can I get it so that people can add in their own information like this? And then at the same time, I was talking to someone about how to put some of these forecasting results into Data Studio. He was an agency owner, so that sounded like a really great project. But then once we started talking to his team about it, they really, really didn't like the idea, because the Data Studio dashboards they created were viewed directly by the client. So the client was going to see these forecasts without any kind of like intermediate stage where they could vet them or check them or anything like that. And that's when I start to think about sheets as an option, where where like anyone who works in an agency really is quite comfortable in a spreadsheet, so they can check them before they send them to the client. And then I realized that also solved my problem of how do you add in these extra columns, because that's what a spreadsheet is. So then it was like, okay, so this needs to be part of a spreadsheet. How do I do that? Started to look into app scripts. I had some experience writing AdWords scripts beforehand, so I knew about URL fetch app. I knew that was a thing, and I was like, oh, so I can call out to, I don't need to write my forecasting algorithm in app script, which would have been, I'm sure there's guys out there who can do that, but that would have been way beyond my technical skills. I can call out to another service over HTTP, which means that anything that I can wrap in an HTTP server, I can compute. Let's get that done, and then and that made me pretty sure that I was onto something and be worth putting the time in when I realized I could do that. And then it's just been a case of learning enough app script to get it done, writing the back end service. There's actually the back end is a little bit more complicated because it's a subscription product. So there's kind of two stages to it, where firstly it checks whether there's a valid API key in the request and things like that. You also well, that's how it started. That was the complexity to start with. Now it's a bit more complicated, where when it's calculating these metrics in the back end, it does that in parallel across many different services at the same time. So it needs to sort of make those requests and then collate them together, kind of thing.
On the subscription side of things, are you taking payment through a pop-up in the add-on, or are you doing that all on Forecast on your website, on Forecast?
I'm doing that all on the website.
Okay. And do they enter an API key as part of the sign-up process?
Yeah, so if you haven't entered an API key already, when you open the add-on for the first time, it will prompt you for one.
Got it. Cool. Because I was trying to think through, it seemed to me like Gumroad was the easiest way to do subscription stuff for Sheets add-ons.
Okay.
The API was easy. And what was nice about it was that you could feed it. I think that what was neat was you could feed something to the API and it would respond whether or not it would respond in a way that hid all PII if it was an active subscription. Whereas a lot of the products that I was looking at, like Chargebee, for example, to get that information, you have to make multiple API requests that return a lot of PII. So you'd have to get like.
So I'm using Stripe for my subscriptions, but it sounds like Gumroad might be a bit easier. Like there's sort of logic on my back end that takes updates from Stripe when a subscription status changes.
Yep.
So if they don't renew or they cancel or something like that, then Stripe is meant to call a webhook on my side, which then updates my database with whether or not the subscription is active. But if I didn't have to do that, things would be a lot simpler. And it sounds like maybe Gumroad would facilitate that.
Yeah, there's a guy named Jeff Everhart, and he's on Twitter, and he also has a GitHub repo that I believe will help you with that implementation.
Yeah, and you saying you can then collect payments from directly within the add-on.
Yep, and I figured out how to, like when the user logs in, it checks their subscription level. If they don't have a subscription, it throws a big HTML pop-up, which then invites them to click a button in the pop-up. When they do that, it opens up an iframe of the pop-up process where they can pay through ChargeBee.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be really good, actually, because I get
Really
people
frustrating, right? That's why I
Yeah,
wanted
like-
to hear how you solved it, because I was like, how are you taking their money?
no, like at the moment, like I get like most people come to it through the website,
Yeah.
so that's not so much of a problem. But
Yeah.
I get a very small number who I think come directly through the Google App Store.
Yeah.
And like it's difficult to sort of tell them like this is a subscription product and you need to subscribe clearly enough before they get into it, and then they're like, oh, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Which is a bad experience. Certainly, if the App Store was a important channel for me, or was going to be an important channel for me, maybe it will, then that would be very high up on the list of problems to solve.
How did you figure out pricing? And do you feel like you're at a good place for pricing, or do you feel like it's always a work in progress, or what do you have to share about
Well,
that?
when I first launched, I haven't changed the pricing since I first launched.
Yeah.
I had sort of big questions around like, was there a need for this? Was it going to be reliable enough for a paid service? Because I'm not a professional coder. I'm more of a my coding experience has been more at the analyze this data end than the make this thing that people are going to pay for and not break
Right.
end. So I didn't want to go in too high to start with. What I've found since is that it's so I'm at the moment I'm charging $20 a month or $200 a year, which is what I felt comfortable charging with in the state of it when it launched. But what I've found since is that it's not necessarily very easy to get started with it as a self-serve product. For example, like if you know that you need to add in one of these columns to deal with lockdown, that's dead easy to do. But it's a big step to be like, to realize that's what you need to do in the first place. So that there's lots of things like that where it's not that easy for people to get started with. So I've been working on guides and templates and things like that to try and help with it. But I think I am probably priced too low for the amount of time it takes me in getting people set up, or the support needed when they're first set up, and then the time in sales as well when I'm demoing it to people and things like that. Of course, that might all work if my churn rate turns out to be obscenely low, and these guys are customers for 5 or 6 years, then that's going to work out very nicely. But it's a bit early to say that I'm going to have an exceptionally low churn rate in that respect.
Do you have a training video that people watch, like as a pop-up when it's done? Like we built a tool called Postomatic, and it has a really big user manual, which is one of those HTML service pop-ups. And it also has like a little animated GIF that loads that says thanks for installing the tool. And that might, like, it sounds like your main challenge is that it's like they need a detailed walkthrough. Like you could.
Yeah, no, that's a really good idea, because I do have some videos on that, but they certainly don't pop up being like, hey, are you confused? Watch this video.
Yeah.
When you first use the tool. People are pointed to them in like the welcome email and things like that, but when you get your welcome email, you probably just grab the API key and then you want to get started straight away. You don't want to watch, like even a 5-minute video.
You could do like a 2-step welcome aboard process where they watch the video, and at the end of the video, you have like a Camtasia animated button on the video that they can click, and it takes them to grab the API key. They got to watch the whole video to get the
yeah. So yeah, some sort of video trickery where they have to watch the whole thing in order to get an API key.
By the way, it's 77 minutes long.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll start off with some basic probability, and then we'll move on to Markov chain Monte Carlo methods. But that's not actually what we use.
Huh. Fascinating. Well,
I think that might leave me with a very small audience, but they would love it.
Yeah. So, what kind of technical gotchas did you run into? Were there anything where you felt like you sunk 76 hours in bug hunting one specific thing?
Yeah. So when I was developing to start with, before it was an add-on, I didn't have the sidebar. It was all just the custom functions, which I haven't shown you in this chat, but that's okay. But then once it became an add-on, the various improvements that I added, and I wanted to mirror them between the sidebar and the custom functions.
Yep.
So I was using the old test as add-on button in here, but that doesn't update your custom functions. So any changes you make in here involving a custom function, when you test as add-on, those changes aren't actually carried through to your test sheet. So I was bashing my head for ages because I was like, I've made all these changes to fix this, but it's still giving me the same results. I thought I was going crazy, but it's actually because they don't update the custom functions when you click test as add-on. I had all this stuff that was working in the sidebar, but then not working when I tested it in the custom functions.
Have you accidentally unpublished your add-on?
No, I don't think I've done that. Done that twice.
Remember when they changed the interface a couple months ago?
Oh god, that always it's so frustrating. Like I do training courses to teach people how to get started with R, and all my training documents end up out of date every 6 months. I've done one class where like half the group was in one half of a split test and the other half was in the other, so I couldn't even there wasn't even any consistency within the classroom about what the interface looked like. It was so frustrating. Wow. The other gotcha, it's not really a gotcha. I think you've had Dave Sotimano on already. He pointed me in the right direction of this, that I was finding it quite tedious coding up all the templates and whatnot for this add-on. Mm-hmm. So instead it's done through client-side JS, and that's all hosted like outside of AppScript. That's just a static file that sits on my website. That's speeded up my dev time on the sidebar quite a lot.
So the sidebar is a
language called. Sorry?
Is the sidebar an iframe?
Yes, but that's not me. That's made like it's a sidebar because all sidebars are iframes. It's not me who's
But you're iframing in, but the HTML.
No, sorry. So I have the whole thing is written in JavaScript.
Yeah.
I've written it in a language called Elm, which compiles to JavaScript.
Yeah.
Elm's a functional programming language, and it's strongly typed as well, which I like. I learned to program in that sort of thing, and I also find that it's very useful for stopping me making dumb mistakes. Like the classic example is like if you add a number to a string in JavaScript, you get the string with the number like concatenated onto the end.
Yeah.
Whereas in Elm, you would get you're trying to add a number to a string. Are you an idiot? Message. Not like that. The messages are much nicer, but that like it stops you making that whole class of mistakes, which is a sort of mistake that I make a lot.
Yeah.
So it's really good to have tooling that prevents that.
Huh.
So it loads the compiled JavaScript from just a static file on the web,
Huh.
and then the JavaScript generates this interface.
Does it look like TypeScript or AppScript or I
It's a
mean?
bit like TypeScript.
Huh. That's cool. I haven't heard of Elm
Um,
before. That's neat.
yeah, it's really nice actually. It makes some things really easy if you're sort of off the well-trodden path of stuff that the Elm designers think you should be able to do. Then I understand that it's an absolute nightmare, but that's not really this kind of thing that I'm trying to do here. So there's most of it's written in Elm, and then there's a bit of app script to to link the use current selection buttons up with the um, app script functionality and things like that.
Hmm.
I
Wow.
can send you some code examples if that's
Yeah, I'm all in.
something you're
Please do.
interested in.
Um, this is really neat. Now, on the Cloud Run side, you and I went back and forth on Twitter about Cloud Functions versus Cloud Run, and you had some pretty strong reasons for doing Cloud Run, i.e., ones I respect versus like you have strong opinions. Uh, can, can you talk about Cloud Run? Because I haven't built in it. I've built with Docker and pushed that to App Engine, but I haven't done Cloud Run before.
Yeah, so I think it's very similar to App Engine, or at least the Docker runtime
Hmm.
on App Engine, where you give it a Docker container that listens over HTTP, and then Google will serve traffic to that container, and they stop and start the container kind of as necessary, which means you're only paying for the time that it's actually computing stuff, which for a kind of demo-y test product like this one, or how it started anyway, was really important. So, if you do a few of these, you end up with like 6 servers just sitting about the place, costing you money. It's much nicer if everything scales down to 0 when it's
Yeah,
not in use. Um, yeah, so that's the big advantage over Cloud Functions for me, in that it takes a Docker. Anything that you can wrap in a Docker image, it can run. So my main programming language is R rather than Python,
hmm,
and R isn't supported by Cloud Functions. So if I wanted to use R for this, then it would have to be through Cloud Run.
got it.
So that gives you a lot more flexibility. I think maybe did we first get in touch after my post on Search Engine Land about getting the Lighthouse scores
Yep,
in Google Sheets.
yep,
Yeah, so for the Lighthouse scores, you need an instance of Chrome running sort of virtually on your back end, and that's fairly easy to do with Docker
hmm,
to install Chrome as part of your image.
yep,
I don't think that's as easy to do in Cloud Functions, where it's like how the installs work through requirements.txt. In Cloud Functions, I mean that like installing the Python libraries isn't enough for that. You need the Chrome install as well.
right, right.
So that limits you in terms of Cloud Functions as well. An advantage of Cloud Functions, or it used to be an advantage anyway, is that you could trigger them on other events, not HTTP related. So, for example, if you had a file that's saved in Google Storage, you could be like, every time a new file is saved, run this Cloud Run function to do some processing, or something like that. I think they're bringing that to Cloud Run as well now. If they haven't done that already. So that's how I see the breakdown of that. The main advantage for me of Cloud Run is the flexibility around programming languages.
So, Richard, can you say that last chunk again? I missed that last sentence.
The main advantage to me of Cloud Run is the flexibility around programming languages.
Okay, got it. Cool.
Yes, if you only code Python or JavaScript, then the case is maybe still there, but it's much less strong.
So can you give insight for people thinking of powering a back end of an add-on, what the range of costs they can expect to run Cloud Run on a monthly basis?
So the free tier for Cloud Run gets you quite far, and then after that, it's very cheap per request. To start off with, I was paying pennies per month.
Yes.
I've recently had someone start using the add-on, and they're using it alongside some sort of solver plugin to try and so that they're trying to figure out like when do we spend our budgets to maximize our ROI sort of thing with this constraint on total budget. And what that does is it makes lots of changes to these columns in very quick succession. So they're hitting the API a lot more, which has sort of boosted me out of the cheap tier. So now I'm at the stage where it would probably be cheaper for me to run it on a server rather than on this sort of ephemeral serverless system. But the part of the system that does profit, like that actually makes the forecast, it doesn't run very well with concurrency. For example, if you have 5 users at once all trying to make a forecast at the same time. And what Cloud Run enables you to do is say, I only want one connection to this container, and if you get any more, then spin up a new container.
Yep.
So that would be a problem that I'd have to solve myself if I moved it onto a server. And that, there's all kinds of other things around managing your own servers that you don't need to worry about on a Cloud Run. So in terms of pure server cost, I'm now at the stage where being off Cloud Run would probably be cheaper. But in terms of like my time and effort, I think it's going to stay on Cloud Run for the foreseeable future.
So put that in pounds and pence for us instead of dollars.
So last month my Cloud Run bill was £25.
Okay.
So that's what, like $35 maybe?
Yeah. So two
So it's not huge amounts at all, but for that amount I could provision a server with enough RAM to certainly deal with the service at the level that it's at the moment.
Yeah. You're speaking to a lot of the reasons why I like Google Cloud too. Like, I'm building serverless applications, and the ability for them to scale horizontally is pretty cool. And
yeah, exactly. Like, yes, I'm saying like my overall demand would fit on a server for $35 a month.
Yeah.
But I haven't looked into it too much actually. But what I imagine is happening is that my demand is actually fairly spiky. So maybe I would have to be paying a lot more to have one server that would handle the whole thing.
Have you thought of rate limits to deal with situations like the people who are hitting your API nonstop?
I have thought about it, but I actually think what they're doing is pretty cool. It's I think it's a really clever. A really clever solution. It's something that I tried to think about myself, but of course I wasn't thinking in terms of what can I use in Google Sheets to do this. I was thinking of how do you learn this stuff on the back end, and I was a bit stuck with that. So I'm super impressed with their solution. I don't want to be like, hey, this really cool thing you're doing, you can't do that anymore.
Right.
That's not what I'm about, and it's not what I want Forecast Forge to be about either.
I had e-commerce platforms block Google Sheets as a user agent because I was doing similar things that were cool, like using import XML to scrape sites. And I wasn't really
like get prices and things.
I wasn't doing black hatty stuff or trying to do denial of service. I was just trying to get like an image link. Like I was trying to get an image link for like a product on a collection page, and they were frustrating, whatever. And I was scraping 40 pages. It wasn't like I was scraping a million pages.
Oh, wow. I'm surprised they even noticed.
No comment. But Anyway, this has been really fascinating. Based on where we are time-wise, I know we're going to lose Jordan in a minute. Um, so, couple more questions. I want to know about your biggest fuck up. This is one of our favorite questions to ask because they take us
Like
in
ever, or to do with this?
having
To
to
do
do
to do with
with
Forecast Forge?
anything digital marketing related that our audience is going to dig.
Oh, okay. Well, this this is definitely my biggest fuck up. Early in my career, before I knew about web measurement, I had a client. They were trying to get more conversions.
Yep.
I was getting them a lot more conversions by sending them tons of traffic from places like Nigeria and other like other bits of Africa.
Yeah.
I told them the numbers were going great. I pushed more and more budgets through what looked to me like really high performing campaigns.
Yeah.
But of course, these people were going onto the site and they were filling in the lead generation form, but they were never actually going to be customers at all. A very, very small proportion of them were actual potential customers. I still think of that as, that's like, and some like there's fuck ups that just happen by accident because you take your eye off the ball.
Yep.
But this like I think of this one as being like my biggest fuck up because I deliberately and with thought went down this path that was like the really bad one to go down. It wasn't like I just accidentally did that. Like I purposefully did this really stupid thing and thought I was doing a really good job while I was doing it.
Did this really stupid. Oh man, Jordan has this story. Jordan recently was working on an AI machine learning thing with Big Watson. And what did you do with Big Watson, Jordan?
I accidentally DDoS'd my client's website.
But
Yeah.
that's accidental, right? Everyone makes mistakes.
Mine are
I feel like mine. It's more like if Big Watson had been like, "Hey, I'm about to make 100,000 HTTP requests to your client site," and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's great. Do it right now," and they do it again.
And I didn't tell you this in advance, so there's no wrong answer here. And if we need to cut it, we can absolutely. So just bear with me for a minute because I'm going to cut this last little thing that I just set out. Richard, you've got a soapbox. Is there anything super important to you that you want to get up on the soapbox and talk about? Any special causes or any websites you think are super cool? Anything that you want our audience to take away from the conversation?
Oh, geez, well, you've had me talking about forecasting for more than an hour, so I feel like I've already been standing on my soapbox in that respect.
Yeah. Anything outside of work?
Anything outside of work?
Yeah.
Jeez. Soapbox time.
And keep in mind,
probably something that people are already aware of, but like I've really been struggling with mental health through this whole like COVID lockdowns, in and out of lockdowns period.
Yeah.
So I think I think a lot of people are aware of that already, but just another kind of like, hey, it's happening to me too, sort of thing would be helpful in that respect. And I don't feel ashamed that I am struggling in that way, so I'm happy to shout that from your soapbox.
Yeah, I think we all are. I don't have a solution, but I've definitely found that Zoom, even though it's flawed and all that, has helped me connect with people all over the world, and it's helped me dig in. Like on the personal level, the pandemic has been brutal for our family, but on the work level, I've tried to just really take advantage of it as best I can. And it's been a time of growth.
Yeah, you've got to try and make the most of your circumstances, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if they're shitty.
Yeah.
Or especially if they're shitty, I guess.
Yeah. Cool. Well, this has been a really interesting episode of Agency Automators. We've gotten to go deep on forecasting. We're going to have a bunch of links of really cool blog articles so you can learn about the philosophies, the algorithms, the tools to get better at it and to leverage it for your practice. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. I want to stay friends on Twitter. I want to learn whenever you've got something new coming up, please hit up Jordan and I. This is a great time to just get people to think about a couple quick things, which are if you're not already subscribed to Agency Automators, we ask that you do, because we've got a lot of content that's coming out these days, and it'd be great to let you know about it so you get notified in YouTube. Also, if you're not a member of our Agency Automators Slack group, there's a bunch of great people inside it. And to get there, you go to agencyautomators.com, scroll to the bottom. There's a really big Slack group invite. There's great information about Python, Node.js, AppScript, anything around agency automation, and just a great group of people. Thanks so much. Any parting words, Jordan? Hit us up. What do you got?
Well, Richard, thank you so much for sharing and nerding out with us. I'm gonna rewatch this episode a few times. So thank you so much.
Cool.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Richard, you rock. Everybody, thanks so much. Keep automating and have a great day.